Welcome to Changemakers. I'm your host, Chris Riata, and this is the podcast focusing on conversations with everyday people who are making historic differences around the world. When it comes to change, there really is no place like Cuba. Throughout the month of November, lawmakers are working to overhaul the nation's constitution and planning to recognize a slate of proposals that would fundamentally change the economy and everyday life for Cubans. Among those new ideas include the formal recognition of the role of the market and private property, two components of Western capitalism that were long rejected by communist officials who ruled over Cuba in past decades. But another interesting aspect behind the new constitution is the Cuban LGBT community's fight for freedom and marriage equality. The country has had a sad and dark history when it comes to the oppression of queer folks. Men and women were forced into labor camps due to their sexual orientation, as the very notion of being gay or lesbian was made criminal. In migrating to America and other places across the globe, many Cubans rejected the hatred and chokehold the communist regime had implemented across the islands. Now, it seems like a new day is on the horizon in Cuba, and activists have had incredible success in getting marriage equality and other protections for the LGBT community included in proposals for the new constitution. They've had some help, especially from Mariela Castro, director of the Cuban National Center for Sex Education in Havana, whose family holds major sway throughout the government. Her father, Raul Castro, the former president of the country, stepped down earlier this year to serve as the first secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba. Her uncle, Fidel Castro, was a revolutionary politician who led the overthrowing of Fulgencio Batista's military dictatorship in 1959, before ruling over Cuba for nearly 5 decades. She's led marches for the LGBT community. She's brought their issues to the forefront, and as a Cuban lawmaker, she's submitted proposals to the Constitution which have included marriage equality. But organizing a modern movement of LGBT activism and visibility takes more than governmental sway. Progress relies on influential voices in society. Voices like Imperio de Cuba. Imperio is a transgender drag queen, entertainer, artist, and prominent voice for Cuba's LGBT community. She has helped bring her community into the light of day by marching at the nation's annual Pride Parade alongside Mariela, as well as showcasing equality and tolerance 3 nights a week at Las Vegas nightclub. The government only began officially recognizing venues serving the LGBT community a few years ago, and it seems clear that has to do with the nation increasingly opening its doors to tourists, specifically American tourists, who began flooding Cuba after Barack Obama relaxed tensions during his tenure in the White House. But it's been Cubans like Imperio who have been crucial in getting marriage equality included in proposals for the new constitution. And whether or not those proposals eventually make their way into becoming the new law of the land, change is definitely happening in Cuba. It's not going anywhere. Imperio invited me to her show at Las Vegas nightclub during my visit to Havana earlier this year. We got to talk about what it's like being at the heart of such monumental change in a country that in many ways still looks and feels as if it were from another time. Before I take you backstage, I just wanted to thank you for listening, and if you want to read more about Imperio or Cuba's new constitution, be sure to check my website, chrisriata.com, which will have links to stories and social media. Get connected with me on Twitter and Facebook, and let me know if there's a changemaker in your community who should be featured on the show. I make my way upstairs into a smoky room, and through a small hallway I find Imperio, who looked like she was absolutely glowing after a headline performance inside the Las Vegas nightclub in Havana. I tell her about the Cuban people I've met, who regard her as the most famous trans activist in the country, and I ask about how she got her start.
It was 30 years ago when it still wasn't permitted in this country, in a neighborhood near the capital, Havana. Thankfully, because of the support of a woman back then that worked for the Poder Popular, her name was Fefi. She helped me push for it, and years went by. Thanks in part to Senesex and Mariela Castro, they managed to dignify us and put us up in the forefront of our revolution through theater. It's because of their initiatives in these issues that this cabaret is able to exist.
I asked Imperio for her opinion on Mariela Castro and the fight for equality in Cuba, and like a true queen, her response is thoughtful, uniting, and political.
I think that my opinion is the feeling of the entire community here in Cuba. Thanks to her, we have won many battles. Thanks to her, we still have a lot of things to accomplish. And if it wasn't for Mariela Castro, the community in Cuba wouldn't have been able to make the advancements that it has.
We begin to talk about what it's like being trans in Cuba, and I ask whether there are more opportunities for women like Imperio.
Yes, of course. Now there's a lot more tolerance from the population and from the political circles compared to years ago. Of course, now everything's permitted. It's seen as commonplace.
I then ask Imperio whether she has ever experienced intolerance, to which she says no. In fact, she's pretty adamant that the government's recognition of trans folks has made it pretty easy to be who you are.
No, in these moments, it's not difficult to be trans in Cuba. Whoever decides to be trans in these times, not only in Havana, but on a national level, it's easy because it's permitted, and that's not a lie or anything.
I ask how trans folks are able to receive surgeries in the government-run healthcare system, and like everything else in Cuba, the issue and the entire system seem to be in the midst of an evolution.
Yeah, so at this moment, it's not on a national level, but yes, the people who are treated by the sex then go to see a sexologist and a psychologist for some time, get an adequate diagnosis, they can receive reassignment surgery.
I ask her if her community's fight for marriage equality will be a successful battle.
Well, as far as I know, I think the union between same-sex people will be approved in the new constitution.
I want to know if she thinks there's any way the U.S. can help further advance equality for the LGBTQ community in Cuba.
What the United States should be doing is not only for the acceptance of the LGBT community, but for the advancement of the people of Cuba. Lift the embargo.
As my last question, I ask Imperio if she has a message for the American people.
Support the Cuban community because we are fighting to move forward despite the United States being bent on every day making more difficult the development of the country. Support us because in the moment when the LGBT community is being pushed forward, they will then push forward the rest of the country.